Okay, a little more extra help on demand, and this time we're going to do quadratic equations, and the quadratic equations will be very similar to what we did on the factoring section, except now we're going to turn them into equations where we set them equal to 0. So I'm just going to go through a handful of them, and hopefully by the end of these you'll see the similarities with factoring and the additional steps necessary to take. So the first thing is that for our purposes with these types of quadratic equations, we always want to set them equal to 0, which is what you see here. Then, this technique, just like factoring, it's the same exact thing with additional steps. I'm going to look for the greatest common factor, which is 3x times x plus 2 equals 0. Again, do the quick mental check to go back. 3x times x is 3x squared, 3x times 2 is 6x. Now, and this is the key step you have to get, and based on what I've been seeing in class, we are either all there, which pretty much everybody is, or we're very close. Maybe it's the guy on the left, and what I mean by that is the factor that's on the left. Maybe it's the guy on the right. Divide by 3, x equals 0, minus 2, x equals negative 2. And that's it, you're done. So when I am solving a quadratic equation, I want to get to the point where it says x equals. That's what solving does. Solving tells you the value of something. Factoring is stopping earlier, and one of the mistakes that I see kids make is the question will say to solve, and they factor. You have to keep going after you factor, which is all of this work right here, setting it equal to 0 when solving. Again, same idea here, looking for the greatest common factor. These were the ones that surprisingly gave a lot of kids difficulty. Maybe it's the guy on the left. In other words, maybe it's the factor on the left, 4x equals 0. Maybe it's the guy on the right. In other words, the factor on the right. Divide by 4, x equals 0. Add 3, x equals 3. So there are my solutions for using the greatest common factor type. Remember, with solving quadratic equations, you set it equal to 0 and you factor. That's your first option. There's also the quadratic formula and completing the square, and that works, or we use that when factoring is not possible. And there's videos on that already up on the site. Now, the AM method. Remember, that means add, multiply. And remember, we always start by multiplying out to 8. So what two numbers multiply out to 8, add up to 6. Now, if you're not good at that, you should watch the video on how to factor. That's not what I'm teaching now. Watch the video on that, you'll get it down pat. You should be able to factor, and if you do, you'll realize that this is x plus 4 times x plus 2 is 0. Maybe it's the guy or the factor on the left. Maybe it's the guy or the factor on the right. Minus 4, x is negative 4. Minus 2, x is negative 2. And sometimes I see kids cross out these choices because there are times in class when we cross out negatives. In the context of this equation, we don't do that because the x does not represent a length or time or distance or anything of that sort. Okay, next one, factoring again. You should know how to do this already. If not, watch the factoring movie. Multiply out to negative 8, add up to negative 4. That's negative 2, positive 4. Maybe it's the guy or the factor on the left. Maybe it's the guy or the factor on the right. Add 4 to both sides, n equals 4. Subtract 2 from both sides, n equals negative 2. So 4 and negative 2 are the correct answers. Any questions about that? I hope not. I hope you're comfortable with that. The next one says a squared minus 25 equals 0. There's actually two ways you could do this, but I would prefer that you do it with factoring. It's a difference of two perfect squares. A minus 5 times a plus 5 is 0. Maybe it's the guy on the left. Maybe it's the guy on the right, or the factor. Add 5 to both sides. A equals 5. A equals negative 5. Now, that's one way to do it, and I like the factoring way because it keeps you in the same mindset that you did the AM method and that you did the common factor method, but it is possible, if you prefer, though I would prefer you not do it this way, to say, well, you know what, I'm just going to add 25 to both sides, which immediately makes it abnormal for a equation, a quadratic equation, and I'm going to square root both sides, and then I get a equals, and here's where you can't forget that it's really plus or minus 5, just like when we do the completing the square technique. I would much prefer you solve it that way. But it is your life, and it's not necessarily bad to do it this way. It's just kind of a little bit abnormal, and I'm afraid you'll make sloppy mistakes. Okay. Next up, factoring completely. When we factor completely, we always look for the common factor first. In this case, I look for the 2. And I have n squared minus 2n plus 1 equals 0. Now, factoring completely always means 2 steps. So it's n minus 1 times n minus 1. And again, I'm going quickly, but you should just watch the factoring video on how to do that. We have the exact question up there. Maybe it's the guy on the left. Maybe it's the guy in the middle. Maybe it's the guy on the right. 2 never equals 0. I reject that. Just cross it off. N equals 1, add 1, add 1, n equals 1. So there's your correct solutions. In this case, oddly enough, it's a quadratic, it's squared, and both of our answers are the same. But quadratics, you come up with 2 answers. Just that sometimes they are the same. Next one. 3x squared plus 12x minus 15 equals 0. They share a 3 in common. X squared plus 4x minus 5 equals 0. You could see by checking back, distributing back, that it works out to that. But I can factor this. X plus 5, x minus 1 equals 0. Maybe it's the guy on the left. Maybe it's the guy, or factor in the middle. Maybe on the right. Impossible. I reject. Minus 5, x is negative 5. Plus 1, x is 1. So there are all of my correct answers. Okay, so that's the 4th case where you have to factor completely. And the big addition there is that sometimes we have to reject the answer because it's not possible. When we're doing a quadratic equation, we're saying maybe it's this guy, maybe it's the other guy, maybe it's the other guy. We try them all, and then we see if they make any sense. If they don't make sense, we reject them. Reject it because 3 will never equal 0, or reject it because maybe we get a length that works out to a negative, and we know that that can't possibly be. Okay, now I try the same approach. I look at number 5b here, and I look for my common factor of 2, and it's simply not there. So I go to plan B, and I multiply by 2 here, which is x squared minus 7x minus 30 equals 0. And I want to go back again to the idea that you should be able to look this work up in the video about factoring if you are not comfortable factoring this. I get x minus 10 times x plus 3, but since I multiplied by 2 here, I have to come back in and divide by 2, and I get x minus 5 times, elementary school trick, 2x plus 3 equals 0. Maybe it's the guy on the left. Maybe it's the guy on the right. Add 5 to both sides. X equals 5. Now, here's where we can get some kids who are a little lazy. Not that you ever met a lazy teenager that could be making a mistake. They'll think the answer is negative 3 because they see the pattern where, like, if it says minus 5 here and they notice that the answer works out to positive 5. So here they see positive 3 and they think the answer works out to negative 3. The problem is there's 2 in the front here. You have to divide by 2. So don't just turn around and switch the signs. Always work it all the way through. In this case, I get x equals 5 and x equals negative 3 halves. Notice again, quadratic, 2 completely different answers. And lastly over here, I notice the 3 is not a common factor, so that gives me x squared minus 20x minus 21 equals 0, which would be x minus 21 times x plus 1. Now I have to, because I multiplied by 3 here, I have to come back in and divide by 3. I get x minus 7. 3x plus 1 equals 0. Maybe it's the factor on the left. Maybe it's the factor on the right. Add 7 to both sides. 3x is 7. 3x is negative 1. Divide by 3. X is negative 1/3. So those are the correct answers. That's how you solve a quadratic equation. All the different types and variables possible. I hope you appreciate the extra help on demand. I hope it makes you better at this stuff and that soon you learn to appreciate and have more fun with quadratic equations. See ya.